I slammed into the steering wheel, dodging another maneuver from the car chasing me. The windshield cracked as the first shot pierced the body. It was night, full moon, but the roads to the house looked much darker than usual. I felt my heart beating out a frantic rhythm, blood rushing in my ears. A couple minutes ago, I'd been thinking about how to explain my late return to Lisa, but now all I could think about was how not to end the day with a bullet in the back of my head. The car behind me kept a steady pace, no headlights on, and only the flashes of gunfire from its window silhouetted the pursuer. I realized they knew I was their target. "Easy, Paul," I said to myself, leaning lower so I wouldn't be a target. My right hand reached habitually for the glove compartment. Damn, this wasn't the car I usually rode in. My gun wasn't here. The woods along the road seemed like the only chance. I turned the steering wheel sharply and swerved onto a narrow dirt path. The wheels howled, the car bounced, and I slumped into the seat, trying to keep control. The pursuer slowed, apparently not expecting me to venture into such a thicket. "Just a little longer," I muttered, but then I heard the muffled sound of an engine coming out of the woods. There were two of them. I jumped out of the car, barely managing to stop it at the edge of the cliff. Grabbing my phone, I sent a text. "Activate safe protocol. Threat to my life. Location being transmitted." 30 seconds later, my car was already ablaze with fire. I hid behind the trees, watching as two men in black jumped out of their vehicles. They were surveying the scene, but I was already deeper into the woods, hiding behind thick spruce trees. They're not hunting an ordinary man, but someone who hasn't forgotten his skills yet, I thought, clenching my fists. I needed to figure out who they were, what they wanted, and why they were targeting me. But one thing was certain. My peaceful life was over. I moved through the forest, ducking, trying to be quieter than the night wind. Skills honed over decades came back like a click. As I listened to every sound, I recognized the crunch of twigs under their feet. They were walking along the trail, searching the area. "Where is he?" one of them said irritably, his voice low and husky. "His car's burned out, but there's no body." "He must be around here somewhere," said the other, tall and confident, with a slight accent. I fumbled in my pocket for a key piece of my retirement arsenal, the compact knife I'd always kept with me. Years of peaceful life in a private company had not made me relax. I took up a position on a knoll to watch them. They spread out, searching the neighborhood. It was important to separate them. The first one was walking straight toward me, picking his way through the bushes. I waited a moment for him to get close enough, then lunged behind him. The knife went gently under his ribs, his body went limp, and I laid him gently on the ground. "Are you there?" the other man shouted when he heard the noise. "Yes, I'm checking," I said, imitating the dead man's voice. He fell silent, believing me. I moved closer to where his shadow played in the trees. Time was working against me. I knew that if I didn't take them out now, reinforcements would arrive faster than I could figure out who was behind this. I made a circle coming in from the other side. He was standing with his back to me, looking around nervously. One sharp move was enough to disarm him, squeezing his throat until he passed out. I laid him down next to the tree and quickly searched his pockets. A cell phone. A half-written text hung on the screen. Target eliminated. Location coordinates. I closed my eyes, digesting what was happening. They were looking for me, but not for theft or simple murder. This was targeted elimination, and it was coming from someone who knew too much about me. Taking out my phone, I activated the encrypted line of communication. "Rick, it's Paul. I'm in Tibet. Someone knows more about me than they need to. Send people out and check the database for possible leaks." Cell phone rings. "Paul, are you okay?" The voice on the other end was surprised, but he quickly pulled himself together. "We're in contact. Coordinates received. Do you have a place to hide? We're close. We'll discuss the rest in person." I disconnected. The forest was quiet, as if it too was waiting for my next move. I had to move. When I emerged from the forest and made my way to one of the old cars I'd left behind in case of emergencies, the goal of my peaceful life in the suburbs with Lisa was already looming in front of me. Everything that had happened couldn't have been an accident. Lisa. I frowned, remembering her latest weirdness. Distant calls, attempts to hide text notifications, and this sudden craving for privacy that Shed never complained about before. At home, I pulled into the garage, quiet as always. The house lights were on. Lisa was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. "You're so late?" She smiled when she saw me. "Business," I answered, trying not to give away anything too much. She got up, came over, and hugged me. "Are you tired?" I smelled the faint scent of someone else's perfume. "Very. I need to rest." Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted my shirt. I knew I'd figure it out. But for now, she didn't need to know that I'd already figured it out. I went upstairs to the bedroom, leaving Lisa in the kitchen. She was humming something to herself, but her voice sounded strained. At the bedroom door, I lingered, listening. Footsteps. She went into the living room, then silence. I went into the bedroom, but didn't turn on the light. Sinking down on the bed, I pulled out my phone, dialed Rick again through the encrypted line. "Rick, I need a background check. Everything about Lisa. Calls, emails, movements over the last 6 months. And find out who owns a car with these license plates." I dictated the number I remembered on the stalker's car. "Got it. Paul, are you sure you want to know all this?" Rick stopped talking. "It's about your personal life. This isn't my first time, Rick. You know me. You do what you're told. Hang in there, buddy. They'll figure it out." I disconnected the phone, slowly unclenching my fists. Even after all these years, I was still in the game. Old habits, as they say, die last. In the morning, I woke up surprisingly calm. Lisa made breakfast as if nothing had happened, but I could sense that her smile was a mask. "Did you have a good weekend?" she asked, sitting down across from me at the table. "It was," I said, catching her gaze. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. A little tired from work," she smiled, avoiding a direct gaze. The phone in my pocket vibrated. A second pause, and I opened a message from Rick. "Your wife is connected to the facility. Details on the calls. Meeting tonight. Caution advised." Something cold clenched in my chest, but I tried not to show any sign of it. "Are you going out tonight?" I asked casually. "Just into town. Marina and I have a meeting at a cafe," she answered, getting up to clear her plate. "Great, then I'll work from home. I have a little business to finish up." She nodded and gave me a kiss before leaving. When the door closed behind her, I sat down at my computer and started opening the saved files from the database I still had access to. Rick had sent me a list of her calls. One number repeated too many times. I knew that number. It belonged to a man I'd worked with before I retired. His name was Carl. Carl was a troubleshooter. That evening, sitting in a small pub on the outskirts of town, I met up with Rick. "This is worse than I thought," he said, handing me a folder of information. "Your Carl is doing some serious stuff. Apparently, he works for a private firm that specializes in eliminating inconvenient people. Your name has come up in their conversations several times in the last 3 weeks. They want me out because I know too much," I said, looking through the files. "And Lisa? She was dragged in? Maybe manipulation. Maybe a threat. But she's clearly hiding something. She had meetings with Carl. She was giving him something. Or receiving." I closed the folder and looked at Rick. "They don't know I'm still the man I used to be. Paul, are you going to tell her the truth?" "Not yet, but I'm going to use it." I stood up, putting the folder under my jacket. "We'll have a plan, Rick. We always do." Lisa entered the house late. Her coat still smelled like someone else's expensive perfume. She tried to smile, but I could see her shoulders tense, her fingers trembling as she tried to untie her scarf. "You're late," I said, sitting on the couch in the dark room. My voice was cold as steel. She flinched, not expecting me to be here. Marina wanted to talk. She'd had a rough day." I stood up slowly, tucking my phone into my pocket. "Busy day? That's convenient. You have a rough day every time I start asking questions." Lisa frowned as she continued to take off her coat, but her hands were shaking. "Paul, what's with the tone? Do you suspect me?" I took a step forward, and her eyes darted toward the door, as if she expected to escape. "Suspicious? No. I already know everything." Her eyes widened, but she quickly pulled herself together, trying to look confident. "What do you know?" "Paul, you're acting weird." "Carl, Lisa. I know about Carl. I know how you met him at the restaurant. I know how you handed him papers. I know you lied to me while I was living under the same roof with you." She took a step back, shook her head. Paul, it's not what you think. I hummed, pulling out my phone. A photo appeared on the screen. Lisa was sitting at a table with Carl, an envelope in her hands. Really? Then what was it? Were you the one who exchanged recipes? Maybe he taught you how to bake pies? Paul, it's not that easy to explain. Damn it, Lisa! I shouted, and she backed away, clutching the back of her chair with her hands. This was your plan? Was it you who decided I was a liability? Or did you just go along with it because he promised you a new life? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't even slow down. You lived with me for 20 years, Lisa, and all that time you thought I was just a regular guy, didn't you? A man who works from morning till night to give you a quiet life. Paul, I didn't mean... Shut up. I shouted so loudly that she froze. You have no idea who you're messing with. I pulled a token out of my pocket and threw it on the table. The metal clattered against the surface. Paul Grayson, intelligence agent. Call sign Phoenix. A retired man who now lived with a woman who had decided to sell him for a pittance. Her lips quivered. She slumped in her chair like she had been hit. You all this time? Have you been lying to me? I leaned closer, looking her straight in the eye. I lied to protect you. And you, Lisa? You sold me out. You betrayed me. For what? For his beautiful promises? Or for fear that he would kill you? She tried to answer, but I interrupted her. No more excuses. You've crossed the line, and I promise you, Carl will soon realize that he underestimated me. And you? I straightened up, retreating to the door. You will learn what it means to live with someone you betrayed. Her face froze in horror as I walked out of the room, leaving her in icy silence. Quick footsteps sounded behind me. Lisa wasn't just going to let this conversation go. Is that it, Paul? You think you could just walk away with this nonsense? Her voice was harsh, almost mocking. You're ridiculous. An intelligence agent? You, Paul? I stopped in the doorway and turned to her. Her face was twisted with rage, and I realized fear disguised as contempt. You've been a weakling all your life, she continued, stepping toward me. You've always hid behind your "I work for my family," your meaningless antics. You think you can scare me with those scouting tales? She snorted. Even now you're not going to do anything. I didn't answer anything, just stared at her, cold and calm. Years of training, the experience of dozens of operations, all of that now played a part. My stillness, my stare, it all seemed to hit her harder than any words could. She tried to continue but stammered. Her lips quivered, and what she was trying to hide flashed in her eyes. Fear. Do you really think anyone would believe you? She mumbled less confidently. You've always been a nobody. And now? I stepped toward her so sharply that she backed away instinctively, nearly tripping over a chair. Lisa, I said softly, as if tasting her name, you have no idea who you're living with. She froze, pressing herself against the back of the couch. You don't want to believe? I continued. Okay, but when Carl disappears and your friends realize they've messed with the wrong guy, you'll be the first to pay. Her breathing became ragged, but she was still trying to save face. You won't do anything, Paul, she squeezed out, smiling weakly. You can't. You're not the right person. I leaned in close to her ear, and she nearly shrieked when she heard my quiet, cold voice. You'll find out who I am. I walked out of the house and headed for my SUV. Lisa stayed inside, but I knew she was already shaking with fear. She wasn't in the mood for ridicule right now. In the car, I activated my laptop with encrypted communication. Rick was on the line instantly. Paul, what's wrong? It's Lisa. She knows more than she's letting on. She has no fear of Carl, but she's afraid of me. I want you to find out who else is involved. You think she's part of a bigger plan? I don't think she even knows what she's gotten herself into, but I'm going to find out. Rick was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. There's another problem. Carl has gotten information on your former subordinates. Some of them have already disappeared. Shit. I gripped the steering wheel. Someone leaked the data? Yeah. And it was someone who knew what they were doing. Find the leak, I ordered, and send me all the data. I came home that night, as if nothing had happened. Lisa was lying in bed, but I knew she was awake. Her labored breathing gave it away. Sleep well, Lisa, I said quietly, lying down next to her. She didn't answer anything, but I could feel her shivering. The next day I found out that Carl had made an appointment. He thought I would make the first move, but he didn't realize that he was already trapped by me. Carl showed up for the meeting. He was confident until he heard my voice behind him. "You shouldn't have touched my family, Carl." He turned around, but instead of horror, I saw a smirk on his face. Paul, don't you get it? I'm not the one who's after you. It's her." Carl showed me a picture on his phone. It was Lisa on the screen. She was smiling, standing next to a man I knew well, a former intelligence chief. My heart sank. "Welcome to the new game, Grayson," Carl said, putting the phone away. "The rules have changed." I stood across from Carl, trying to digest what I'd heard. Was Lisa working against me? Over the years, her smiles, her affectionate words. Was it all a deception? "Are you saying my wife is working with you?" I hissed, holding back my rage. Carl grinned, taking a step back. "No, Paul. She's not with me. Her work is much more interesting. We're only on the same side of the board, you might say." But he squinted. "You didn't realize it right away, did you?" At that moment, my temples throbbed. I felt dizzy, as if someone had suddenly yanked the rug out from under me. I staggered, grabbing a chair. "Paul?" Carl tilted his head, like a predator spotting prey. "Is something wrong?" "Go away," I mumbled, trying not to fall. "Now." But he didn't. He was watching me intently, as if expecting something. The world around me began to blur, and I slumped back in my chair. My heart was pounding like crazy. Paul, Carl shook his head. "You need to trust your wife more. She knows how to finish what you've started." I looked up, but my eyes were already cloudy. What did you do?" "Me?" Carl laughed. "It wasn't me, my friend. Your Lisa is a true master. She did it slowly, carefully. Small doses so you'd think it was just old age." I gritted my teeth, gathering the last of my strength. "You're not going to succeed," I hissed. "I already have," he replied, turning and walking away. "Have a good night, Paul. If you live to see the morning." I don't remember how I got out of the building. The world shook like I was on the deck of a ship in a storm. My hands shook, my legs shook, but my instincts still worked. I activated the distress signal on the watch I'd worn since the beginning of my career. It was more than just an accessory. A second later, I got a call from Rick. "Paul? What's going on?" His voice was harsh. "I've been poisoned, Lisa." I interrupted, trying to focus. "Find me. I'm on my way." "Hold on." I blacked out and settled to the ground, closing my eyes. When I woke up, the light was too bright for my eyes to adjust right away. There was the smell of alcohol and medicine all around. Rick's voice came from somewhere off to the side. "Damn it, Paul, you almost died." "Where am I?" I wheezed, trying to sit up. Rick was immediately beside me. "You're in one of our clinics. We figured it out. She's been putting poison in your food and drink, in small doses to make it look like chronic pain or age-related problems." I nodded slowly, trying to collect my thoughts. "How long has it been going on?" "Apparently over a year. Maybe 2. I shook with rage. She knew what she was doing. She was waiting for me to become weak. Her plan backfired. "We found you in time." But Rick stopped talking. "This is just the beginning. Carl? He's gone. And Lisa, too." I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger I hadn't felt in years. They both think they've won, but they don't even realize they just started a war. Lying in my hospital room, I stared at the ceiling, pondering. How long has she been planning this? Was Lisa part of something bigger from the beginning? Or was she recruited later? I trusted her, loved her, and she used that as a weapon against me. Deep inside rose a feeling I'd buried long ago. The pain of betrayal mixed with cold determination. She wanted to weaken me, to make me helpless. But she forgot who I used to be, forgot that I know how to turn weakness into strength. I rose slowly, despite my bogus protests. "Paul, what are you doing?" Rick was standing at the door. "Getting back in the game," I said, putting on my old jacket. "This is personal now." The next day I was on my way. My goal was clear. Carl and Lisa hadn't just betrayed me, they were part of something much bigger. That had to be found out. Rick said there was only one person who could help me right now, and I knew who he was talking about. "Paul, are you sure you want to get her involved?" he asked as he walked me to the helicopter. "She's the best," I replied, buckling my seatbelt. And if anyone knows how to clean up this mess, it's her. Okay, then here are her coordinates. Just remember, Paul, she'll go out of her way for you. Try not to forget that. I didn't say anything. Something trembled in my soul, but I didn't have time to think about the past. Laura sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of Berlin, watching the passers-by. She always chose such places. Quiet, no fuss. She was a little over 40, but she looked younger than her years. She was tall, slender, with a poise that betrayed a person accustomed to discipline. Her black hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and she wore light makeup on her face, emphasizing her expressive green eyes. She looked the same as the last time we worked together. I walked over, and she noticed me right away. Her gaze softened, and the corners of her lips quivered in a warm, almost imperceptible smile. "Paul, you always find me in the most unexpected places," she said, standing up and holding out her hand. "Laura," I replied, shaking her hand. "It's good to see you. I'd say the same, but your appearance leaves a lot to be desired. What happened?" "It's a long story," I sighed, sitting down across from her. Laura stared at me, her gaze sharp and attentive as always. "Then tell the short version." I briefly outlined the situation. About Lisa, Carl, the poisoning, their disappearance. "Shit, Paul, this is serious," she said when I was done. "That's why I'm here. You always had a way of seeing what I was missing." Laura leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Did you know that I always thought your wife wasn't worthy of you?" I didn't say anything. "So, what do you want me to do?" Her tone changed to businesslike. "You know how Carl works. He has contacts we can use. We need to bring them to the surface. And Laura, I need support." She smiled, her eyes flashing with battlefield excitement. "Paul Grayson is asking for support? That's something. Okay, you know I'm with you." We rented a small apartment in Berlin, where we began to prepare. Laura worked as smoothly and quietly as ever. She collected data on Carl's movements, his meetings, and found several places where he might be hiding. "This man is paranoid," she said, laying out the map on the table. "He has 3 hideouts in different parts of the city, but one of them was activated yesterday. So he's here." I nodded. "Yes, but there's something else you need to know. He's not just hiding. He's planning something." "Like what?" "I don't know exactly, but his men have started moving toward the eastern border. It doesn't sound like running, more like preparing for something big." I thought about it, looking at the map. "Laura, thank you for agreeing to help. I realize I'm dragging you into this." She looked at me with a slight chuckle. "Paul, you've always been like this. Never thinking about yourself, always protecting everyone around you. And to be honest, I would have done it even without you asking me to." I met her gaze for a moment. It was that rare moment when I felt something warm pierce my wall of cold rage and determination. But there was no time for emotion. "Okay," I said, turning back to the map. "Let's start with his hideout. We have work to do." On the 3rd day of our search, Laura, sitting at her laptop, suddenly called out to me, "Paul, you have to see this." I walked over to her, peering over her shoulder. On the screen was access to the encrypted data she had just hacked into. It was Lisa and Carl's correspondence. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Carl wrote, "Absolutely. He thinks his chronic pain is just age. Paul has never been suspicious in that regard. He'll get it all done. The important thing is that you get the estate papers ready and those state awards he still has. They're worth millions." I froze. My awards, their value wasn't just financial. They were decorations earned for accomplishing the most difficult missions. Each one was a part of my soul. "She knew what she was doing," I muttered. "She was a classy actress. All this time, she'd been playing the role of loving wife to make me let my guard down." Laura frowned. "Paul, she's obviously been planning this for a long time. There are more tapes here. They discuss how to move the money offshore after she gets access to your assets." I clenched my fists. She wanted to destroy everything ID built. "For what? For the money?" Laura looked at me. "It's not just money, Paul. She sees you as a threat. You're not a person to her. You're an obstacle." I looked away, trying to digest what I was hearing. Meanwhile, Laura showed me another detail. "Paul, this isn't just revenge. Carl has a bigger plan. She displayed a map on the screen. It showed key infrastructure, power lines, water intakes, and a chemical warehouse. It's a network of facilities in Eastern Europe. I think Carl is preparing a major sabotage. If they blow up these points, the consequences will be catastrophic. Is this a terrorist operation? I asked, and a chill ran down my spine. Maybe, or an attempt at sabotage to create chaos. Either way, it's a huge scale. And Paul, he has support. There are too many people involved. I sighed, realizing the stakes are rising. We need to prevent this from happening. Laura nodded. I've already contacted our contacts, but you'll have to be at the center of the operation. Late that night, as we finished planning our first move, Laura lingered by the window. I walked over to her, noticing her staring out at the nighttime city. What are you thinking about? I asked. About how long it's been since we've worked together, she said, smiling. We've always been a good team, I replied. She looked at me, and there was more than just friendly warmth in her gaze. Paul, I want you to know that I would do anything for you. You've always been more important to me than you realized. I froze. It was unexpected, but I couldn't help but feel that there was truth in her words that I'd ignored for too long. Laura, you don't have to say anything, she interrupted. Just know that I'm here to help you, even if it costs me everything. Her words echoed deep inside. Thank you, I said quietly. Laura and I prepared for the surgery all night. Carl had chosen one of his old hideouts in an abandoned industrial area. The place was perfect for surveillance, smuggling, and preparing operations. We knew it wasn't going to be an easy walk. At dawn, we reached the grounds. The building was surrounded by a high metal fence, and armed men roamed the perimeter. Through the thermal imager, we counted at least 10 guards. They've done their homework, Laura said quietly as she lowered the device. Carl obviously realizes that you're coming for him. That only makes things more interesting, I said, checking my gear. We decided to go in through an old drainage tunnel that led to the basement. Laura led the way, her movements smooth and confident. She had always been an excellent agent. Quick thinking, precise action, absolutely reliable. Once we're inside, the most important thing is to find Carl and his files, she said as we moved through the dark corridor. He's obviously not only hiding, but he's working on something big. I nodded, clutching the silenced pistol in my hands. We came to a narrow staircase that led to the first floor. Laura stopped, gesturing for me to follow her. I knew she was ready to back me up at all costs. The first floor was littered with crates of equipment and weapons. We moved between them until we heard voices. They start moving in 2 days, one of the guards was saying. Carl wanted to go off without a hitch. And if someone tries to interfere? Asked another. Carl said he has a plan for that. No one will interfere. I looked at Laura, and she nodded. We came out of hiding at the same time. 2 accurate shots, and the guards collapsed to the floor. Quick and clean, she whispered, looking around the room. There were maps and documents on the table. I grabbed them, flipping through them. They're planning to attack chemical warehouses to create mass poisonings, I said. It's state-level sabotage. Laura frowned. We have to find Carl now. He's the key to everything. We went up to the second floor, where the control center was located. The door was ajar, and I heard a familiar voice. They'll be here. I can feel it, Carl was saying to someone. I gestured for Laura to get ready. We rushed inside at the same time. Paul, Carl said with a grin, looking at me. You came. I was just beginning to miss you. Cut the crap, Carl. You lost, I said, pointing the gun at him. Are you sure? His eyes sparkled. I have all the leverage. All you have is anger. At that moment, Laura noticed that one of his men was moving toward her with a gun. She fired first, but the return shot knocked her back. Laura! I rushed to her, feeling everything inside me turn upside down. She was lying on the floor, breathing heavily. The shot had hit the vest, but it had hit her hard. I'm okay, she wheezed. Go get him, Paul. Carl seized the moment and ran out the back door. Laura, stay here. They'll be back, I said, meeting her gaze. Paul, you're important to me, she said with difficulty, squeezing my hand. I nodded, feeling that simple acknowledgement go deeper than I'd expected. They'll be back, I repeated and rushed after Carl. Running through the abandoned corridors was unexpectedly difficult. Every step hurt, but it wasn't the wound, it was the thoughts that suddenly burst through the chaos. Laura, her name echoed in my head over and over again. She was always there for me, even when I didn't notice it. She had my back, supported me, done everything in her power to keep me going. And now, lying on the floor after the shooting, she still insisted that I go forward, that I finish what ID started. I suddenly realized that Laura was the one person who had always been loyal to me to the end. Not for profit, not for position, but for something greater. For me. This feeling of respect and gratitude came over me so abruptly that I almost stumbled, running my eyes down the dark hallway. You're better than I deserve, Laura. And I won't let Carl win. I won't let everything we fought for be in vain. I stormed into the main hall, where Carl was. In the center stood Lisa, with a haughty smile on her face. She looked flawless. The black dress emphasized her figure. Her hair was perfectly styled. But her eyes, cold, prickly, gave everything away. Well, hello, Paul, she said mockingly. Carl stood beside her, arms crossed over his chest. Welcome, old friend. You took a long time to get here. I slowly raised my gun, pointing it at Carl. This is the end, Carl. He grinned as if ID said something funny. Are you so sure? Paul, look at you. You're pathetic. You've got nothing left to fight for. Shut up, I hissed, shifting my gaze to Lisa. And you? I still can't understand how I could have been so blind. She snorted, crossing her arms. Blind? Paul, you've always been blind. Did you think your pathetic heroics and your awards mattered? You're nothing. You were nothing, and with me, you became somebody. Is that what you call someone? I asked, holding back my rage. Poisoning your own husband? For what, Lisa? For money? She laughed, high and mocking. Money, power, everything you couldn't give me. You've always been a weakling, Paul. You never even saw me play with you, the way you ate from my hand. You played? I said coldly, looking into her eyes. Do you think you won? I know I won, she said, stepping closer. Look at you, a tired, pathetic old man who's still trying to play the hero. That's enough. I barked. Her smile faded, but she continued anyway. You should have left everything to me, Paul. I was your best chance. And now, I interrupted, clenching my fist. You get nothing. No money, no power, no respect from me. You're nothing, Lisa. Rotten, greedy, cowardly. She froze for a second, then looked angrily at Carl. Kill him, Carl. Now. Carl raised his gun, but I was faster. One shot, and his gun flew out of his hands. He cried out in pain, clutching his wounded arm. Paul, he began, but I had already stepped toward him, putting the gun to his forehead. You've lost, Carl. You won't do it, he wheezed. Try to stop me, I said, glaring at Lisa. She backed away, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Lisa realized the situation was getting out of control. Her face contorted as I stepped closer, and she spun around, lunging for the door. You're not going to get far. I gritted through my teeth, dropping Carl to the floor with a knee strike. He groaned, but stayed down, cradling his wounded arm. Lisa ran, but her high heels played tricks on the metal stairs. I caught up with her at the exit, grabbing her arm. Let go of me, she screamed, trying to get away. No, Lisa, you stay. We're going to do this so that everyone can see who you really are. She tried to hit me, but I intercepted her arm, forcibly turning her toward me. You've always been weak, Lisa. You think money and power can hide that? No. Now everyone will know who you are. I dragged her back to Carl. He tried to get up, but he fell to one knee, cursing me. Paul, you're not going to get anywhere with this. He wheezed. I will accomplish one thing, Carl. I replied coldly. It'll show everyone what traitors look like. Lisa screamed and tried to break free as I began to bind her together with Carl. Paul, you wouldn't dare. You've never been like this before. She screamed, yanking her arms, but the ropes were already tight around her wrists. Carl lashed out furiously, but each gesture only made the knots tighter. Paul, damn you, he hissed, looking up at me. I grinned, testing the strength of the bindings. Damn? I repeated in a pulling tone. Carl, don't you get it yet? You brought this on yourself. When they were both bound, I dragged them over to a massive metal hook hanging from the ceiling. A few minutes later, they were hanging in a humiliating position. Carl tied to the rope with his head to the ceiling and Lisa tied to him, upside down, her face against his groin. Both were half naked, which made the sight even more ridiculous. You're crazy, Lisa gasped as I pulled them even higher. Maybe, I replied calmly, pulling her hair away from her angry face. But you know, Lisa, that's nothing compared to how rotten you've turned out to be. Carl rasped, but only swayed them more, making the pose even funnier. Paul, he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. Carl, I'd hold my breath if I were you. Your ally isn't going to help you anytime soon. I pulled out a can of spray paint and wrote in large, block letters on the wall above them. The fate of traitors is always humiliating. Stepping back, I assessed the result and nodded satisfied. Paul, let us go. You're going to pay for this. Lisa squealed again, but her voice was almost hysterical. You know, Lisa, you're right. I have paid for it all with years of lies, betrayal, and pain. Now it's your turn. I turned on the beacon on my watch, letting the agents know where to find them. As I left, I heard Lisa continue to scream while Carl remained silent, only occasionally emitting muffled moans. When the operatives arrived, one of them, noticing the scene, whistled. Now that's art. Grayson, you're certainly a master of epilogues. The other agent laughed, taking a picture of the writing on the wall. I hope this goes in the report. I remained silent, only casting one last glance at the two traitors, who now dangled like puppets in a theater of the absurd. Outside, I stopped, looking up at the sky, which was beginning to lighten. This is the end for them, I thought. But not for me. For me, it's a new stage, and this time I know exactly who's beside me. Laura was waiting for me by the car. Her eyes expressed concern, but when I approached, she smiled. Are you ready? She asked. I nodded. Now it was just beginning. After the operation was over, I spent months piecing together the aftermath. The documents Laura and I had recovered from Carl's safe house turned out to be key. They contained information on corruption schemes, international connections, and even plans for state-level sabotage. I handed it all over to the appropriate agencies, but made sure to keep some of the details under wraps. With that, Carl and his network were completely destroyed, unable to be rebuilt. Lisa found herself facing the law. She was arrested for attempted murder, financial fraud, and complicity in terrorism. She was sentenced to life in prison. Carl, by then broken and disgraced, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, but his life was ruined. After these events, my life changed. Laura and I became closer than ever. We settled in a small house outside of town. Laura had always dreamed of a quiet life, and I realized I wanted the same. Her love of plants turned out to be a true art form. She would spend hours in the garden, creating amazing arrangements that were like little corners of paradise. I would find her at work with the soil, sometimes dirty but always happy, and smile. Do you ever rest? I asked her once, watching her plant new flowers. This is my rest, Paul, she replied, shaking off her hands. And you? When are you going to start enjoying life? I think I've already started, I answered, sitting down next to her. We spent evenings together, talking by the fireplace. Laura was an amazing conversationalist, intelligent, kind, with a terrific sense of humor. Her view of the world, her desire to see the best in people inspired me. You changed my life, I said one day as we were looking at the stars. You did too, Paul, she replied. I think we just found each other at the right time. We became a team, not only in life, but in helping others. Together we created a small charity that helped people who were victims of crimes like the one that ruined my life. Our home became a place where there was always warmth, joy, and understanding. Laura continued to tend her garden, and I learned to appreciate every minute I spent with her. We proved that even after betrayal and pain, it is possible to find love, happiness, and meaning. The main thing is to keep your principles and believe in good. And every conversation we had, every evening we spent together, reminded me that I was finally home.